Thank you so much, sir. I am presenting my talk on cardiac autonomic neuropathy, its implication in cardio-diabetes and renal patients. Basically, it will be on the diabetic patients who already have, who suffer from cardiac diseases as well as neuropathy as well as nephropathy. Autonomic neuropathy is a common but least recognized complication of diabetes mellitus, and diabetic autonomic neuropathy may present as a dysfunction of either one or more organ systems which are controlled by autonomic nervous system, or it may involve the entire ANS, as ANS is a complex neuroregulatory network which consists of two complementary systems we all are aware of, which maintain the homeostasis, which include the sympathetic as well as the parasympathetic systems. Now, this autonomic disorders are common and are diverse in character, and can that is cardiac autonomic neuropathy, it may present with hypo or hyperfunction of the sympathetic or the parasympathetic systems. The presentations are diverse and range from the common to rare presentations, benign to severe, localized to generalized, or they may be episodic to continuous, and may be transient or progressive. So what is cardiac autonomic neuropathy? It is defined as the impairment of cardiovascular autonomic control in patients with established diabetes mellitus following the exclusion of other causes. Cardiac autonomic neuropathy is a very common, with prevalence between 1.6 to 90% among diabetic patients, and it increases with the disease duration. The EuroDiab IDDM complication studies, which was a cross-sectional clinic-based study, which involved 3,250 random patients of type 1 diabetes from 16 European countries. It showed that autonomic dysfunction is one of the most common complications present in subjects in follow-up, and the prevalence rate was greater than 60%, have been reported in cohorts of patients with long-standing type 2 diabetes mellitus. The clinical manifestations are mostly overlooked, but are serious complication of diabetes, and these can be manifested as resting tachycardia, orthostasis, exercise intolerance, and intraoperative cardiovascular liability, sweating disorders, silent myocardial infarctions, and these all increase the risk of mortality. The autonomic dysfunction can affect the daily activities of individuals with diabetes and may invoke the life-threatening outcomes. So here is a case of a patient with who was 42-year-old man with type 2 diabetes for 7 years, and he presented with complaints of bilateral foot pain and numbness for 2 years, episodes of dizziness on standing for last 1 year, and increased intolerance to heat, early satiety, constipation, difficulty in emptying bladder, and erectile dysfunction. He was taking glyburide and simvastatin and had stopped taking his antihypertensive medication due to orthostatic symptoms. The neurological examination showed difficulty walking on heels, absent ankle jerks, sensory loss for all the modalities on the feet, which were red and dry. His blood pressure in supine posture was 150 by 90 with a heart rate of 98 beats per minute, and on standing the blood pressure reduced to 90 by 60 millimeters of mercury, and heart rate increased slightly only to 102 beats per minute. And on autonomic screening, it showed that there were reduced response to heart rate response to deep breathing, Valsalva maneuver, and orthostatic fall of blood pressure was almost 40 millimeters of mercury with compensatory increase in heart rate. And there was post-void residual volume of about 300 ml, which was abnormal. So this illustrates the case of autonomic neuropathy affecting the sympathetic, parasympathetic, as well as the enteric nervous system with distal sensory motor peripheral neuropathy. Now, the sympathetic failure is manifested as orthostatic hypotension as well as heat intolerance, while vagal failure in this patient was because of is manifested as impaired upper GI motility and blunted response to deep breathing as well as Valsalva. The enteric nervous system failure manifested with constipation, and sacral parasympathetic failure with bladder and erectile dysfunction. So autonomic nervous system plays a major role in regulation of cardiovascular functions. Autonomic innervation is primarily extrinsic control mechanism regulating the heart rate as well as the cardiac performance. As Vagus nerve is the longest autonomic nerve, and it mediates almost 75% of all parasympathetic activity. And the neuropathy in diabetes being length dependent, seen in longest fibers earliest manifestations. Thus, parasympathetic nerve, the vagal nerve, is the first nerve to be involved and to manifest as autonomic with autonomic manifestations in diabetes. And this initial CAN in diabetes is characterized by early augmentation of the sympathetic tone because of the reduction of the parasympathetic tone. So the mechanism involved for this sympathetic overactivity in insulin resistance conditions is because of in acute condition, it is the peripheral mechanism where the insulin causes endothelial dependent vasodilatation, resulting in baroreflex mediated sympathetic activation. While in chronic condition, the central mechanism comes into play where the insulin operates in the paraventricular nucleus of hypothalamus and the arcuate nucleus, which are involved in the autonomic control of the body. Then insulin-induced carotid body overactivity has also been demonstrated in animal model of insulin resistance. And in comorbid conditions with obstructive sleep apnea patient, this OSA leads to chemoreflex upregulation due to nocturnal chronic intermittent hypoxia and arousals, fostering sympathetic activation. So the pathophysiology of diabetic cardiovascular autonomic neuropathy is because of their neurons. Their glucose intake is not insulin dependent and is related to extracellular concentration of glucose. So thus neurons are unable to store glucose and are susceptible to toxic effect of increased plasma glucose levels. Increased intracellular glucose level is the primary factor which plays a pivotal role in development of cardiac autonomic neuropathy. The increased glucose activates the aldose reductase, which catalyzes the NADP dependent conversion of glucose to sorbitol. Now, this sorbitol increases the intracellular osmotic pressure and causes direct neuronal damage, causing abnormal blood flow. Also, the NADPH reduction in the NADPH level, this affects the redox cycle of glutathione, which induces high oxidative stress, causing endothelial dysfunction through disturbances in the nitric oxide production. Now, what are the clinical implications of this CAN? Now, this can present as silent myocardial ischemia. Now, reduced appreciation of the ischemic pain impairs timely recognition of myocardial ischemia or infarction. This silent ischemia in diabetic patients may result from CAN or autonomic dysfunction, which is attributable to coronary artery disease itself or from both. Now, in a meta-analysis involving 12 cross-sectional studies, it was seen that in 5 studies comparing the presence of silent MI measured by exercise stress test between diabetic individuals with and without CAN, it was the incidence of silent MI was much increased in patients with CAN. In DIET study, which involved 1,123 patients, CAN was a strong predictor of silent ischemia and subsequent cardiovascular events. Thus, presence of symptoms such as acute onset of dyspnea with or without coughing or severe fatigue, acute onset of nausea and vomiting should raise a high index of suspicion of an ischemic event in these patients. The association between cardiovascular autonomic neuropathy and mortality. It has been seen in longitudinal studies of subjects with CAN that they have shown 5-year mortality rates as high as 16 to 50% in type 1 as well as type 2 diabetes mellitus. Total mortality rates are higher in subjects with CAN at baseline than in those with normal tests at baseline. Studies have shown a 2.3-fold increase risk of CAN in diabetic patients which who are showing a prolonged QT interval, as CAN might also predispose to malignant ventricular arrhythmias, sudden death from cardiac arrest because of Torsades points, as in long QT syndromes. In Eurodiab IDDM complication studies, CAN was strongest predictor of mortality during 7-year follow-up, exceeding the effect of traditional cardiovascular risk factors. The hazard ratio was measured in, it is really difficult to measure the hazard only because of CAN, but a large and carefully characterized cohort study of more than 8,000 participants with type 2 diabetes mellitus enrolled in ACCORD trial confirmed that presence of CAN predicts all cause of mortality with a hazard ratio of 2.14, and due to cardiovascular disease mortality with including cardiovascular disease mortality with hazard ratio of 2.17, independent of baseline cardiovascular disease, diabetes duration, and multiple traditional cardiovascular risk factors. Now, CAN and myocardial dysfunction. Presence of CAN is linked to development of diabetic cardiomyopathy. CAN may promote left ventricular hypertrophy due to its impact on sympathovagal balance and baroreflex sensitivity. Vagal component of baroreflex is a major protective mechanism that adjusts heart rate, stroke volume, and minimizes the myocardial stress. A depressed baroreflex is associated with unopposed sympathetic tone, increased systolic BP, and subsequent left ventricular hypertrophy, and increased risk of heart failure and cardiovascular diseases. A large cohort study of type 1 diabetic participant in DCCT EDIC reported that presence of CAN associated with increased left ventricle mass and concentric remodeling as assessed by cardiac MRI, irrespective of age, sex, and other factors. This is the proposed link between CAN and myocardial dysfunction, where the sympathetic activation in CAN causes catecholamine toxicity as well as the insulin resistance, where insulin resistance leads to derangement of fatty acid metabolism, increasing its concentration, as well as reduction in glucose uptake, whereas the catecholamine toxicity causes mitochondrial oxidative stress, leading to apoptosis and myocardial fibrosis, which leads to left ventricular dysfunction as well as cardiomyopathy. So next was the intraoperative and peri-operative cardiovascular instability. It was seen that individuals with CAN experience great decline in heart rate and blood pressure during induction of anesthesia, and also have severe intraoperative hypothermia resulting in reduced drug metabolism and impaired wound healing. Then association of CAN and chronic kidney disease. It was seen in a study, atherosclerosis risk in communities, which included almost 1,500 adults followed for 16 years, that higher resting heart rate and lower HRV indices were associated with higher incidences of developing end-stage renal diseases. So, the clinical correlates of CAN are the patients at greater risk of CAN are those with higher age, who have longer duration of diabetes, have poor and unstable glycemic control, have comorbid diabetic polyneuropathy, retinopathy, and nephropathy, and other cardiovascular risk factors like obesity and metabolic dyslipidemia. Now, what are the clinical signs which we should not miss while we are evaluating a patient of diabetes? Is resting. The first is the resting tachycardia. The abnormalities in the heart rate variability are the early findings of CAN, and the first manifestation of cardiac CAN tends to be related with vagus nerve damage. This causes resting tachycardia as the sympathetic tone becomes dominant, and the resting heart rate may increase to about 130 beats per minute. Tachycardia eventually diminishes in few years due to progressive sympathetic nerve fiber damage, and fixed heart rate, which are unresponsive to moderate exercise, stress, or sleep, indicates almost complete cardiac denervation and is indicative of severe CAN. So a recent meta-analysis, including 87 studies, confirmed a relative risk of increase of 10 beats per minute increase in resting heart rate, the increase in the relative risk of 1.15 for cardiovascular disease and 1.17 for other all causes of mortality. Now, second important sign is the abnormal blood pressure regulation. Normal subjects have predominant vagal tone and decreased sympathetic tone at night associated with nocturnal BP. In diabetic CAN, pattern is altered, resulting in nocturnal sympathetic predominance during sleep and hypertension, which may be non-dipping or reverse dipping. Now, what is this? These are measured to if through ambulatory BP monitoring, there is a decrease in blood pressure from day to night. If it is less than 10, it can be less than 10%. Then it is identifies as non-dippers, and if it is less than 0%, it is considered as reverse dipping. Non-dipping is almost 39 to 62%, while reverse dipping is 9 to 30% common in diabetes that as compared in general population. The prognostic role of non-dipping and reverse dipping is between 2 to 8-fold increase of cardiovascular morbidity in 6 studies of an overall population of 880 patients, mainly with type 2 diabetes mellitus. Reverse dipping was found to be an independent predictor of progression from overt nephropathy to end-stage dialysis in patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus. Associated higher frequency of left ventricular hypertrophy and fatal and severe non-fatal cardiovascular events in patients of CAN. Now, third sign is exercise intolerance. Autonomic dysfunction impairs exercise tolerance, reduces responses in heart rate and blood pressure, reduction in increase in cardiac output in response to exercise. Patients with CAN need to rely on their perceived exertion, not on heart rate, to avoid hazardous events due to intensity of exercise. Presently, there is inadequate evidence to recommend routine screening for asymptomatic diabetic patients with an exercise ECG test. The next important clinical sign is orthostatic hypotension, and this is defined as the sustained reduction of at least 20 millimeters of systolic blood pressure or 10 millimeters of diastolic blood pressure within 3 minutes of standing or head-up tilt test. Now, symptoms include weakness, faintness, dizziness, visual impairment, and even syncope after a change from lying to standing posture. These orthostatic symptoms may be misjudged as hypoglycemia and can be aggravated by several drugs, including vasodilators, diuretics, phenothiazines, and particularly the tricyclic and antidepressant as well as insulin. Now, the pathophysiology of this orthostatic hypotension is in diabetes. The OH occurs largely as a consequence of effration of sympathetic vasomotor denervation, causing reduced vasoconstriction of the splanchnic and other peripheral vascular beds. Another clinical sign is the postural tachycardia syndrome, also known as POTS. It is defined as a symptomatic and sustained heart rate increment of 30 beats per minute or more within 10 minutes of head-up tilt in absence of orthostatic hypotension. Now, the orthostatic intolerance is inability to tolerate upright posture because of symptoms of cerebral hypoperfusion or sympathetic activation or both, which are relieved by vicompency. Patients, the main pathophysiology is little bit obscured, but patients have either defective peripheral vasoconstriction and an increase in calf blood flow, or others have reported increased peripheral arterial resistance and decreased blood flow. Now, among these patients who are presenting with CAN, the autonomic history plays an important role. Our thoughtful autonomic history is most important component of patient with autonomic symptoms. The key aspects are timing of onsets, the temporal course, associated illness or context, and modification with use of medications, dietary supplements. Did the symptoms begin at a specific point in time? How rapidly they develop? If sudden, what else is happening at that moment of time? Is there any history of antecedent viral illness or dietary change or any stressful event? And when are these symptoms are improving or are worsening with the time? And how long a patient could stand without discomfort, and what does discomfort consist of, and are the symptoms more worse during any period of the day, during morning or evening, while standing, after meal or exercise, is all to be inquired of. Now, there are varied pattern of ANS depending upon the part of ANS being involved, and whether the function is increased or decreased, and whether it is involving the sympathetic or the parasympathetic system of the autonomic nervous system. And thus we are having a battery of tests to evaluate autonomic nervous system. And we have the reflex tests as well as heart rate variability tests, which include the time domain measures, the frequency domain measures. Then we have the microneurographic techniques. But the Toronto Consensus Panel on Diabetic Neuropathy concluded that cardiovascular autonomic reflex testing, also known as CART, are sensitive and specific, as well as reproducible, safe and standardized techniques, and they recommended their use as gold standard for clinical autonomic testing. There were various studies. There were various studies, but the Toronto consensus were the guidelines of Toronto consensus were considered and are taken to date, with CART being considered as gold standard for diagnosis, while HRV is used for prognostic information only, or it can be used in clinical use, but that can be in addition to the CARTs. So autonomic function testing, they consist of battery of tests which intend to evaluate integrity and function of ANS, and these tests are intended as adjunct to the clinical examination in diagnosis of autonomic disorder. Now, different centers offer different batteries of autonomic function tests, but when should AFT be considered? When the signs or symptoms of autonomic dysfunctions are present, and a definitive diagnosis cannot be made for the clinical from the clinical examination and routine lab tests alone, and the diagnosis of suspected autonomic disorder will lead to change in the management or will eliminate further testing, then we should go for AFT. Now, the battery of tests which can be utilized are the cardiovagal functions, which can be evaluated by heart rate variability, the heart rate response to deep breathing, as well as Valsalva maneuver. The vasomotor adrenergic functions can be evaluated by blood pressure response to standing or tilt table testing, and blood pressure response to Valsalva maneuver or the hand grip test. Then pseudomotor functions can be evaluated by quantitative pseudomotor axon reflex testing, quantitative sensory test, thermoregulatory sweat test, or SSR, that is sympathetic skin response test. A combination of these tests should be utilized. Not all is possible at all the centers, but a combination of at least one or two from all the groups is important to reach to a conclusion. So most of the centers, they use these group of 6 tests for evaluating the parasympathetic as well as the sympathetic nervous system balance: the deep breathing test, the Valsalva maneuver, the head up tilt test, the hand grip test, as well as the cold pressure test. In this deep breathing test, the heart rate variation during respiration is seen when the subject is asked to do paced breathing for 5 with 6 cycles in a minute. The EI ratio, that is the RR interval, is calculated, and a ratio of EI is derived to reach to a conclusion where the EI should be greater than 1.21 for the test being normal for particular age. Then we have the postural challenge test, where when the person is asked to stand up from a lying posture, there is a fall in blood pressure, in the systolic blood pressure, and there is increase in the heart rate, but it is less than 20 millimeters of mercury in a normal subject. In a normal subject, and there is increase in the heart rate just at the start of the tilt, and it normalizes towards the 30th beat. So we take a ratio of 30 to 15 RR interval, and this should be greater than 1.04 in a normal subject. Then we have Valsalva maneuver, where we calculate the Valsalva ratio for the RR interval in of second phase and in comparison to the fourth phase, where there is increase in the RR interval in the second phase because of the increase in the heart rate, because of reduction in the blood pressure, because of the Valsalva maneuver. But there is normalization of the heart rate in the fourth phase of Valsalva maneuver. So this should be greater than 1.21. Then we go for the hand grip and the cold pressure test, where we examine or measure the diastolic blood pressure, which should be the change should be greater than 10 millimeters of mercury for the test to be labeled as normal. These are the scoring of the these battery of autonomic tests, where early or definite can, it depends upon the if two tests are abnormal, then we label the tests as abnormal. If one test is abnormal or two tests are borderline, then it is considered as early can. So these are the methodology for tilt table. And the clinical usefulness of can is screening and diagnosis is that if it can be, the treatments are targeted to clinical consequences of can, we can treat the tachycardia, we can treat the hypertension, the nocturnal dipping, and the orthostatic hypotension. And in asymptomatic can, it helps in the risk stratification for stroke, the nephropathy progression, and stratification for major surgery. The assessment of can also be done with heart rate variability, where a decrease in heart rate variability is the earliest clinical indicator, and it is in general asymptomatic. And we have the time domain as well as the frequency domain analysis, which are derived from the ECG recordings. These HRV testing is recommended for research and for clinical evaluation along with the card testing. Then we have the baroreflex sensitivity testing, which is the response to a sudden increase in the blood pressure and used in research protocols to assess the cardiovagal and sympathetic baroreflex function. Then we have the MSNA, but because of its invasive nature and time consuming nature of the procedure, the MSNA is not indicated for routine autonomic assessments. So, but in clinical OPD, we can assess the patient subjectively by a COMPASS 31 score, that is Composite Autonomic Symptom Scale, which is a scoring of 31 questionnaires. And this has been found in our study that a higher score of almost 28 is indicative of definite scan. So if at all the centers or in OPD, if we are not able to assess the patient for autonomic dysfunction, at least we can assess, if we are suspecting a patient to suffer from can, we can assess the patient from this composite autonomic symptom scale, and we can refer a patient for autonomic testing at the centers where it can be done. Now, I would like to conclude my talk with that. CAN is a serious chronic complication of diabetes and is independent predictor of cardiovascular disease. It is associated with high morbidity and poor quality of life. Assessment of CAN includes a broad battery of diagnostic methods and varies between the clinical practice. However, cardiovascular autonomic reflex tests are the gold standard. Role of intensive diabetes therapy in delaying the development of CAN in type 1 diabetes is confirmed, but there is limited evidence for the intensive multifactorial intervention in type 2 diabetes. Detection can help both the clinician as well as the patient, although cost effectiveness studies are still to be done. Underdiagnosis can be addressed through a mix of education, flexibility, adaptability, and to individuals' risk profile, in addition to search for more affordable assessments. Thank you so much.